Thank you, Dr. Vinayak. This was power-packed with so many gripping insights. Thank you. I'll return you at the stage, please. Thank you. And as Dr. Vinayak mentioned, we would be now advancing to a panel discussion. May I invite Ms. Shalini Misra, Group Digital Offerings Leader, Sopra Steria, to moderate the discussion. Round of applause, please. Requesting Ms. Ruchika Panesar, Vice President and Head of Technology, APAC Region, American Express, and Mr. Aseem Gupta, Senior Director, Head of Product Engineering, R1 RCM India, to join the panel discussion along with Dr. Harsh Vinayak.
Yes, you do.
Thanks, Dr. Harsh, for introducing the topic and setting the context. If you look at each wave of technology innovation, it brings with it its own challenges, primarily about the misuse of technology or the harmful effects of technology. The other factor that comes into force is that the technology innovations far outpace the development of regulatory frameworks or ethical frameworks. And in this context, organizations carry a huge burden. And, that's where AI finds itself today. By nature, we've realized algorithms are amoral. By that, I don't mean they're immoral. What I mean is that they do not have any moral compass. But these algorithms could have wide-ranging impact. And hence, they need to be responsible. That's the topic that we are going to be discussing today in this panel. Let's start with you, Ruchika. Though Dr. Harsh did touch upon what's responsible AI and the principles. If you typically go through the net, there are various definitions of responsible AI. Everybody talks of principles, everybody talks of bare minimums. What, according to you, is responsible AI? And amongst the principles, which one, according to you, is a must-have for each organization?
Thank you. First of all, glad to be here. It's great to see a very packed audience here. I'm here after 3 years, sitting exactly in the same spot as I did, by the way, in a different panel. So lovely to be here. And Dr. Harsh, I think, did a fine job of really setting the stage for all of us. So he's given us a lot to build on. I'd say as usual, I'll start with an example and a story. I'll take us back to 2003. Actually, Dr. Harsh, during the course of your presentation, this just occurred to me that this has happened. In 2003, I applied for a home loan. My first ever home loan. I was a fairly young female corporate engineer who decided to buy a home. I was denied credit by 4 banks. Unless I decided to have a male applicant, co-applicant with me, which at the time could have been my father, but I was too proud for that. And they basically were worried about my credit worthiness because of my gender. And that's a very interesting example. Because now imagine if that was the way credit decisions were made today, and or we allowed machines to use that principle for building credit worthiness for the future, I would really be worried about our daughters. Yeah? So I hope that explains from my vantage point, one, why do I care about responsible AI? And 2, really at the heart of it, when you look at the definitions out there, there's several tenets, of course, but there's a couple of tenets to responsible AI that are critical in my mind. Keeping the human in the center. Yeah? While AI is amoral and doesn't really, have any intelligence of its own in many ways, It is a function and a byproduct of us as a society and our collective intelligence, including our biases, right? So unless, as I think the last page said there, Harsh, unless we do something differently in how we design AI, and we embed some of these tenets into AI as we design, we will not have, a great future with AI, right? So there's a couple of tenets that I'd like to talk about. Number one, human in the center. Second, being regulatorily and politically aware, of course. And the third is ethical design. And ethical design is a lot about how it impacts regulation, how it impacts people, and then, most importantly, looking at algorithmic bias, right? And when you talk about the principles, as you said, there were many that were described on the page, whether it is really fairness at the heart of it. Transparency can't happen without fairness, or accountability, or privacy and security, or inclusivity, which is one that I spoke about. All of these being very important principles. I think that I'd say two things on what I think is bare minimum. One, I'd say everything starts and ends with accountability. So I would really suggest that, accountability is clearly, I would say, the top of the house from my point of view. And secondly, I'd say that I don't think it's about each one of these principles in isolation. I think it's also about looking at your ML ops and your AI life cycle in the way you envision, to prototype, to truly build, deploy, monitor, all of that life cycle, and embedding the principles across the life cycle. Because now imagine if you were taking a principle and starting to think about that principle only during testing, right? Or if you hadn't thought about the principles that I described as part of envisioning, it would fail flat in your face. And so therefore, obviously I'd say that embedding them, all of the principles across the value chain is critical. There's no one principle that I would say is more or less important, ideally, but it starts with accountability from my vantage point. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Ruchika. Great response. Aseem, moving on to you. We talked about what, and though Ruchika did touch upon the why, do you think responsible AI is all pervasive? You need to implement it in every AI deployment? Or do you think, it needs to be in some specific cases, because there's going to be a cost associated. Now that cost could be monetary, could be accuracy, could be, maybe a larger time to deliver. So your perspective on that, why do we need it exactly? And are the clients asking for it? That's the follow-up.
So I think Ruchika put it very aptly, because we can have decision-making systems that are very human-centric, and we can have decision-making systems that are, very straightforward. So if I kind of take an example of, a system that is just predicting when a machine will fail, yeah, right? Just say generators running this hall, electricity in this hall, right? If I have a system that is just trying to decide when will the generator fail, the worst thing that will happen is that, my system is not going to work, yeah, and probably generator is going to fail, right, before you expect it. And we'll end up having lunch in a dark room, right? You'll probably end up having paneer instead of chicken, right? I don't think, you would want to use responsible AI in a scenario like that. But if I take a more human-centric example, right, where I would want to be fair to an individual, more accountable, more inclusive, right? So a system which is taking a decision on a patient being able to afford, a line of treatment, right? So I can have, various parameters going into that. I can look at the diagnosis, I can look at the line of treatment, what's the insurance coverage, what's the financial history, a lot of stuff that is going to be very private to that individual, right? I would want to make sure a system like that is responsible because I would want to remove all the data bias, algorithmic bias, any human bias, right? And would want to have it as a continuous process, right? So being fair to the individual, being inclusive, so we were not just dependent on the decisions that my system is giving. We need to be able to either challenge the decision that is coming out or be able to complement the decision, right? Data privacy, right? There's a lot of sensitive information that would go into a scenario like that. Want to make sure that, that individual's privacy is protected and be accountable, like what Ruchika said, right? We need to be all accountable for the systems that we develop, for governance, right? From a regulatory standpoint, from an audit standpoint, right? And it needs to be any system that is responsible. It needs to be, looking at a single decision, right? Which is being human-centric, right? Remove any adverse effect of an AI system. I think that is where I would want to take a decision, right? If I am actually impacting an individual's life, or if it is just a simple, simple decision that does not, affect a human life. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So extending this further, Harsh, to you, though you've covered it quite a bit, just a yes or no. Do you think people are actually going for it besides health, which he said, there's a human element, an all-pervasive impact, and so on? A banking system, would it do it only because of regulatory stuff, or is it, their moral compass speaking up and saying the algorithms need to be fair, and hence, let's go for responsible AI?
So, yes or no?
No, but truly, what do you think? The regulators are the ones who are guiding the implementation in the non-health sectors?
And I can't really answer in yes or no because this is a temporal problem.
Okay.
It's a matter of time before regulations become habit, and it has happened across. Since AI systems and their decisions are not apparent to the public right now, there isn't an outcry of regulations. It's happening now, yeah? And as organizations, as companies, we do what our customers want us to do.
Yeah.
So even though right now there might be regulations which are forcing us, eventually it will become our creed, it will become our way of doing business. So.
Thanks. That was a fantastic response. So you're saying as it matures, it becomes a force of habit.
Yes.
And so on.
Has to.
Yeah.
Use this mic somehow that is not audible enough at the back.
Okay, sure. Do I take this one? Am I audible? At the back?
Good.
Great. Aseem, coming to you. Now that we've addressed the what and the why, let's move on to how. AI depends upon data. We all know data can be skewed, can be fudged, can be biased. And imagine the impact of AI algorithm on this biased data. It gets magnified multiple times, and the impact could be disastrous. Because the data is massive, it's humanly impossible to manage the biases. What do you think technology can do to address the issue of data bias?
Okay. So I think Ruchika took a very valid example, and I think in fields, gender imbalance, right, ethnic imbalance, right, socioeconomic, there are various type of biases that exist, right, and end of it, we are the ones who are actually developing the systems. We are the ones who are identifying the training data, developing all the algorithms, right? Training the algorithms, right? So there is human bias that kind of comes in. So data-driven, algorithmic, human, I think they all kind of get combined into a data bias scenario, right? And there are various examples. Coming from a healthcare organization, would probably take another healthcare example, right? I mean, if you kind of take like a polygenic risk score, right, which is essentially predicting genetic disorders in individuals. That risk score is completely dependent, or the amount of data that is being used is largely European ancestry, right? If you apply the same risk score to Indian population, it won't work, right? I mean, you'll probably get a lot of skewed results. There are a lot of such examples that kind of exist today. So somebody came up with a very interesting acronym called WEIRD, right? So which is wealthy, educated, rich, wealthy, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, right? So that's where the data exists. And you start applying AI on demographics that do not fit within that kind of profile, you're obviously going to get a lot of skewed results. So there are a lot of techniques that are available. So there is FAIR-ML, which is a combination of 4 different algorithms like random forest, lasso, etc. So that gives you, ranking of all the input variables that go into your, an AI model. There's TensorFlow, which has a fairness indicator, a what-if tool, right? So there are a lot of tools that are available, techniques that are available that you can actually use to understand what's the fairness of the algorithms that you're using. And I think that is going to be very important as we kind of productionize a lot of these systems, because that's where once you kind of start talking about, here is what is going into my system, right? And here is what's the contribution of each of the feature in my AI model. That's where the confidence comes in, right? So I think it's quite important.
Yeah, so if I read you correctly, what you're saying is use technology to monitor not only the data flow into the model, but maybe through the life cycle.
Absolutely.
Correct. Ruchika, the next one is for you. Should AI implementation just be left to the teams that are implementing it, or because of the all-pervasive effect of AI, should there be an oversights committee? I'll give you an example. Typically when we're using AI for optimization or automation, there's a common perception that it could lead to loss of jobs. That's just one aspect of an ethical issue that I'm raising. But there are numerous such issues. If you look at it, the impact of it is so vast that, just the team implementing seems kind of weird. So your take on it, and who should be in those oversight committee, in terms of a governance is what I'm looking at.
Sure. There's a couple of things I think that we'll touch upon both of those earlier questions that I'll start with. First of all, you gave a very interesting example, and honestly, in the perfect world, we wouldn't need the concept of responsible AI, would we? Right? We need this concept because the world isn't perfect. And because 85% of organizations have actually said that, there has been ethical challenges to implementations that have happened. There's a lot of attention, and the speed at which the whole AI field is evolving is remarkable, right? So therefore, first of all, keeping up to it is extremely important. Let's talk a little bit about the ethical challenges. You spoke about one, which is this whole, what is called sometimes the job apocalypse, right? Yeah. And then there's this aspect of all of those sci-fi movies that talk about singularity, right? And machine intelligence becoming more powerful than human intelligence at some stage, right? And then imagine if that machine intelligence were based on flawed human intelligence and inaccuracy, and what you're doing is building self-learning models that are therefore going to perpetuate the problem. Because the goal of AI, and as we build models, is to make them smarter. We create self-learning models, right? We train the data constantly with the outcomes of the results. So what are we doing? We're making it, we're making it even more precise. So now imagine the data that you fed into the model in terms of the training data, and the actual outcomes are already flawed. And now you're making the system learn that, and therefore now you're perpetuating the problem. So absolutely, and of course I've already covered the aspect of inclusivity, so I won't go there, but those are all ethical issues, right? And now when you look at that, there's an aspect of implementation and there's an aspect of we don't know what we don't know. And so therefore the previous question which you said about data governance, which is about, you know, you've got to have that data preparation and the profiling of the data and the making sure that you've done the homogeneous, heterogeneous checks and ensuring that you have the right set of data to train the model is a very critical step, isn't it? Going back to where you embed it. Now, therefore, coming back to governance and oversight, it cannot be any one person's responsibility. It has to be, organizations have to responsibly build these governance models. So I'll take our example. At Amex, of course, we're bank regulated, which is one of the reasons why we do it this way. But really, we also realize that no one individual, no engineer, no data scientist with the best of intentions knows it all, does he? Does he or she? Right? And so therefore, what we've done is we have multiple tiers of governance. We have a first line of defense that starts with our data scientists and our ML engineers, and within every business unit. So for example, if it's a servicing business unit or a risk business unit or whichever business unit, we have a committee within the business unit, which is our first line of defense. And that second line of defense is really a centralized enterprise-wide committee, as well as neutral groups like compliance, fair lending, right, that are actually going to review it. And before any model is deployed, it goes through what we call a model governance management model, right, which is actually part of our risk committee of the board. So there is accountability at every level within the organization because, again, you have to have senior leaders educated, you have to have engineers educated. It cannot be one person's job. And even after post-deployment, of course, you have to have the right model monitoring capabilities, making sure there's traceability, making sure that there's auditability in what you've built, and being able to monitor it over a period of time to see whether this is actually getting us the right outcomes. Do we really need to keep this model running or should we retire it? Right? And a lot of this governance is also going to come to life through tooling that you provide to engineers to be able to do the job. Whether it's in the form of frameworks or it's in the form of do's and don'ts, so what variables to use, what variables not to use, all of those aspects go into a rich, strong, centralized framework and process that I believe organizations should really invest in, if they haven't, to make sure that this is not left to one or two individuals, but is a corporate-wide responsibility.
You know, I've also heard, just extending your answer further, there's an initiative called Confiance Ai. By the way, EU is much ahead of US when it comes to regulatory and kind of ethical frameworks. So Confiance Ai, which literally translates into English as Trust Ai, is an initiative which is a government, private kind of consortium with multiple companies. I know about it because we are a part of it. They basically authenticate, it's supernatural in the sense that various nationalities are coming together to basically certify AI algorithms. And that's another initiative. So a lot of stuff is going on governance. But moving on further, let's touch upon interpretability and explainability. You know, lots of XAI algorithms, which basically, as you said, you know, give an output on which feature gave what importance, local explanations, global explanations from a feature perspective. But ultimately, when we deploy XAI, explainability AI algorithms, what the users are going to be business users who may be AI literate, who may not be AI literate. You know, how do they interpret it? That brings into force, you know, interpretability. But as you all know, interpretability is an evolving field. It's at a very nascent stage. How do you think technology can help from a business perspective, building explainability to the center and ensuring that AI remains fair and ethical from a business understanding perspective?
So I think First of all, there is a lot of overlap between interpretability and explainability, right? A simple system, a simple decision tree, right, which has a limited set of parameters, right, can be interpreted by a human being, is what an interpretable system is, right? But, there are less and less of those, right? And I think as we kind of evolve in this field, our systems are getting more opaque. The parameters that go into a particular system, they are increasing multifold. So you have something like AlexNet that works on just images, right? And it has 62 million odd parameters that it works on, right? So imagine having a system like that and putting it in front of you. How do you kind of trust, right? What's kind of coming out of it? So yes, you need a lot of techniques in kind of having an explainable system. And, things like random forest, right? A lot of algorithms that exist today, right? So you can use a lot of different algorithms to kind of come up with the interpretation, right? But there is a need for us to be able to look at each feature and each parameter that is going into our AI system and first determine what is the contribution of each parameter, right? So you have techniques like LIME or SHAP, right? Or deep LIME or deep SHAP, right? When you're talking about DNN or CNN. You have, scoring indicators, right? Like feature importance scoring that kind of gives you a relative scoring between different features that are going in. I think you'll have to have a lot of these techniques built into your system so that your model is more explainable. And unless and until you make it transparent, nobody's going to use it. I mean, I'm not going to trust any decision that a system is giving me unless and until I understand what's going, into that system. So as humans, we also, as a user would also be having a lot of unconscious bias per se, right?
True.
Apart from the ones who are building it.
Yeah, yeah. Harsh, to you, I mean, he talked about the fact that interpretability is obviously the need of the hour. But if you look at it, we've got, from an ML systems perspective, the simple ML models, and on the other hand, you have something like the neural networks, the CNNs, the RNNs, the DNNs, and the transformers, encoders, and decoders. If you look at all of those, from a simple to a complex, you cannot have one size fits all. It may be easy to bring explainability and hence transparency to an ML model. But what about the neural networks with multiple layers? I mean, how do you encounter those?
Yeah, so the problem is becoming more difficult. I remember from many, many years ago, 35 years ago, we had to model, this is one of my assignments at college, we had to model a sociology problem. It was a sociology class, crowd behavior. What did we do? We went in, we looked at the data, we interpreted the data, human beings, we interpreted the data and came up with certain guidelines which were then put in a table as a decision table that was then coded in. What happens today? The human is out of the loop. We feed in the data, the machine itself is inferring through statistical means these rules, and therein lies the issue. Yeah? So absolutely, decision tables, you look at the decision table, you look at all these, it's easy. But how do you do it today? So one way, of course, is to wing it, but that's not the right way. There are formal algorithms and testing, for example, backward propagation, or it's called layer level modeling. There's plots that you can generate. I mean, there's really several of these formal methodologies in place now that goes and dissects your model layer by layer and gives a trustworthiness or explainability kind of score. So that's the first step that you need to do. You need to go and find out whether what you're writing makes sense. Use technology to check technology. I mean, our human minds can't comprehend these.
Yeah.
So that's the way to go. Yeah?
You've answered my next question as well on the trust.
Okay.
Yeah, moving to Ruchika. We've talked about transparency, we've talked about explainability, we've talked about interpretability. Now, all of these, balancing all of these is not going to be easy. We've talked about the fact that there's going to be a cost associated, which could be accuracy. In your day job, you talked about the governance mechanism, and I'm presuming that it's a pretty mature governance mechanism. Have you encountered scenarios where you've had a trade-off, and how did you balance it out?
So, the cost cannot be accuracy. It's a non-negotiable, first of all. In our environment where, first of all, you know, we are the organization that we are, security, privacy, transparency, trust, all of that is built into our brand as a company. And we keep the customers in the center of, you know, everything that we do. And so we have an accountability to the customer in making sure that the accuracy cannot be compromised. So first of all, that's a non-negotiable. And so how do you ensure that is the question? I think more importantly, because it's a little bit of the chicken and an egg, and you find, to an earlier comment that was made, that a lot of, you find a lot of examples where people are implementing responsible AI with the fractions of what the regulation needs. Right? So there's a, you know, there isn't wider thinking sometimes, and you just look at the regulation, you look at what is required, and you implement it that way. And that obviously leads to flawed design. What I would say on this aspect is we have to give the tools, like I said earlier, to the data scientists and the engineers to be able to have the right framework for deployment and make sure that they know which variables they can use, which variables they cannot use in making decisions. We've done a lot of scoring work, which, as Aseem said, and one of the things that we've added is also model reason code for critical algorithms, which basically, even if there are questions raised, we can explain why the algorithm made the decision that they did. So what was the final reason for the decision? Whether the decision is offering a customer a certain product, whether the decision is offering them a line, whether the decision is you know, predicting why a customer is calling us, whatever the use case may be, we have embedded in it like a reason code that allows for this. And I truly think that a lot of these concepts are obviously very complex, but you've got to sift through the complexity and therefore create sustainable processes and frameworks that are implemented at an enterprise-wide to remove the inconsistency from it. And then the checks and balances, of course, to ensure that the decisions are truly accurate, because that could cost us millions of dollars and billions of dollars, but also a lot of trust from our customers, which we take very, very seriously. And so therefore, you know, if I've kind of touched upon it, but that would be my point of view on, like, you can't compromise on accuracy, and you have to embed the requirements of the regulation and or the principles across the life cycle, really going back there.
So this was absolutely fantastic. What you're saying is it is a mandatory thing, purely from an explainable perspective, especially because you are answerable to both the customers and the regulators.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And if I may just add, like, how many of us have read on a web page or like in even any kind of social channels or otherwise, why am I seeing this? Right? It's the simplest example of, we've touched upon explainability, but why am I seeing this? Why am I seeing this on my social feed? Why am I seeing this advertisement? Why am I being made this phone call? I think we have to, and every country is going through their own evolution, obviously. But frankly, we'll have to get to that point of being able to say, why are you calling me?
Yeah.
Which I very often find myself saying to people who call, why are you calling me? Who gave you my number, right?
Yeah. Why are you calling me brings me to another point. We talked about transparency. She talked about privacy. Paradox, right? How do you manage it in AI?
So I think that's it's like a pertinent paradox, right? And I think as the regulations evolve, as the systems evolve, right, it's going to get more and more complex. It's a little more closer to what we do, right? From an R1 perspective, right? We work with US healthcare clients. We are obviously governed by HIPAA. So our first priority is to ensure that we are protecting health information. There's a lot of regulations around it. Having an encryption system, right? Something like a fully homomorphic encryption, right? That allows you to encrypt the data, but it also allows you to compute, right, on that encrypted data, host that encrypted data on a public cloud, right? Because obviously you will need power of the cloud, right? We spoke about quantum computing as well, right? I think a lot of that power is really required, and you cannot just always work with enough firewall. So something like an FHE, which allows you to keep computing on encrypted data, get analyzed results, download those analyzed results in encrypted form, right? Get it behind your firewall, decrypt it, look at the results. I think it gives you ability to, manage that, keep a balance between that paradox, right? I mean, privacy and safe from quantum attacks, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I think, and there are a lot of other encryption algorithms that are out there, but, this is what just came to my mind first.
Yeah. All of us are technophiles in this room, and in our experience, we know that when systems go into production, over a period of time, all of them degrade. All of them, may deteriorate in terms of performance and may fail as well. From a responsible AI perspective, and this is a question for all of you, what are the checks do you think we need? Let's go from here. Ruchika?
Yeah, as I said, I think having a model monitoring framework, just like you would with now you go back and do a parallel, some of you who are, in software development, generally speaking also, you follow the same fundamentals, really, when you think about it, because you have observability built in, you have traceability built in, you have to have auditable results, and you have to have the tools at a granular level to be able to see how the model has performed over time. How have you enriched the data to actually feed into the model to make it more effective? How is the score changing? And you also have to have, so in our environment, we also have thresholds and alerts that are built in to catch for anything that may be an anomaly from a feature or concept point of view. And again, there's a full science behind this work. But you're really looking at the health of the model. Now, in this case, it could be a model, it could be a bot, right? In the context of other automation capabilities or broader AI concepts, you think about, the life cycle of a bot. It's in the same way that you're thinking about the life cycle of a model. And therefore, there may be a moment where you have to retire the model because now, generally, the decisions are being driven or the population has changed completely over a period of time, etc. So I would say that is the ongoing need, and having that governance model also checking in and the right tools and the right observability is critical.
Okay. Thanks, Ruchika. Aseem?
Add a little bit?
Harsh, you wanted to add?
So drift is normal in any software, any structure, anything. But here there's another layer of insidiousness. Because today's models are not static models. Right? We are constantly feeding them data and we are asking them to update themselves. What if there is a malicious data that is being fed? It's a real possibility. I come from defense field. It can be unintentional, but it can also be intentional. And that's so all the things that you said about life cycle health check is even more important in these self-learning, continuously updating models. Yeah.
Aseem?
I will probably just add to what Dr. Hirsch said. So I think transparency, right? Explainability that we spoke about, right? I think that's going to be required on an ongoing basis, right? Because I think you can build a system and not tell everybody, the malicious data, right? Or what's the contribution of each parameter that is going in. If you're not able to do that, adaptability of that system is it's not going to happen. Right? And it just becomes a moot system. Right? End of it.
So MLOps is the need of the hour. So let me conclude by saying that the AI systems that we put into production today are actually building the future that we as individuals and society will be living in. Let each of us, our organizations, the government and the regulators work together to build a future that is fair and unbiased. With that, we end this panel discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vinayak, for initiating the discussion, and the esteemed panelists, Aseem, Ruchika, and Shalini. So thank you so much. We are going to have you be seated for a little more time and take some questions and answers. How about that? Okay, so with the relevance of talking about deploying responsible AI, we have an opportunity to address, we have all the panelists here to address questions from you. We will take a maximum of 3 questions, that a small caveat, before we break for lunch. So the forum is open for questions and answers. Do we have any takers for the questions? There you go.
Hello, panel members. It was amazing to hear all your thoughts. I have a question, not really a question, but a doubt that today we talked about ethical dilemma, and there is no one formula or one way of handling an ethical dilemma. There are a lot of cultural biases, and it could also be different for different countries how they want to handle an ethical dilemma. So do you think going ahead, like today we have products which differentiate themselves on features, so we may have an AI offering which differentiates itself on how the way they handle the ethical dilemmas?
I'll take this question, Rajdeep, because this is something I've encountered as well. We were working on, and I'm using an example on something that we've been working on. We're working on something which was a global offering that we were creating. What we realized is that the level of AI adoption across countries is going to differ. The data for countries is going to differ as well. So what you will have to work on is bringing into force and taking into account these regional influences and having almost like an ensemble of models which are more region specific, but from a regulatory perspective, there's a lot of cooperation across regulators of various countries that needs to be enforced. Okay, so that's the need of the hour, especially from a banking perspective. This is what I've encountered. Ruchika, maybe you want to add on to it?
The only thing I would add there, and it's a kind of, I'll take it away, I don't think this is necessarily just an AI question. Because when you look at engineering and software development and systems of the future, and you look at the regulatory landscape, this is true for anything we do, right? And so you really have to sit back and look at what are the frameworks of engineering that we have across companies, what's the level of localization that is possible, what's the level of composability in architecture that is possible, what are the RegTech frameworks we need, and then you apply all of the other MLOps aspects and process and framework that you've created for AI and deploy it in the same way that you would to software engineering to customize for countries, create homogeneous groups of countries. For example, if let's say something is applicable to Asia Pacific versus to EU. So I think that flexibility in the way that we design software and systems is at the heart of this, and I think that this is honestly beyond just the concept of AI. It's about responsible development in the future.
No, but just to add on to what Ruchika said, technology is also sort of evolving to take into account all of this. Federated learning is a new concept that's come up, where the data remains local, the model just gets trained on the local data, and then the learning is sort of aggregated. So technology is also evolving to take into account the nuances that you've highlighted, Rajdeep. Yeah.
So if I may just extend a bit, I'm not just keeping it to the banks and the regulations. It's about ethical dilemma. So it can apply to the way my smart car is taking a decision for me.
You're absolutely right. And it's pan domain and it's pan technology as well. The self-driven cars, that's why there's a long curve in terms of training and testing, because they also realize it's not one size fits all. You know? You want to add, Aseem? Harsh?
Let me take a problem from the other angle, which I think you were trying to get to, which is it's not about compliance only. It's truly about trustworthiness. It's truly about the ethical side of it. And the way, and so compliance can be all over the place. Every country, every region, every society has different compliance. But if one has the framework, and this is what a lot of us are trying to get to, which gives us that insight, which gives us that transparency into how decisions are being made, then on top of that, you can develop these localizations. And that's what all our organizations are trying to get to. How do we really understand what this machine is doing? Once we know that, then it's easy to comply with certain rules. Yeah, so that's my thought about it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for answering that question. I think we have another participant. Yes, please.
Hi. Thank you so much for the lovely session. My question is a bit different. I understand all those things that you mentioned are very relevant and very important in the ecosystem that you work with. We have to implement ethics into the AI part. We have to manage the expectations. We have to explain the solutions that we create to the stakeholders. How do we manage the timelines at the same time and make the client understand that all this will take time for us to give them? So a normal AI solution without ethics will take me 5 days. With ethics, it will take me 10 days because multiple elements are involved in that. How can I manage the expectation in terms of timeline? If there are any challenges and it leads to a delay, how do I handle the expectations at that time? So normal timelines and the delayed timelines. How can I manage the expectations of a particular client? This is the question.
So I'll tell you, this is not just an AI issue, is it?
Are you a project manager or an architect? What?
So my role is pretty diverse. I am a data scientist. I have to, I'm involved in the complete ecosystem of solution, starting from understanding the client's expectation and managing the delivery part as well. So I have to be wearing multiple hats and I have to be involved in multiple parts.
I hear your pain.
Can I just make a comment here? I think first off, I agree with my colleagues here that this is a beyond AI question. But it's kind of going back to everyone plays a role. It's kind of going back to, first of all, any client who is assuming that AI is a silver bullet and is going to be like, parso kar do, is smoking mirrors and has no clue what AI is. So starting at the top, educating your stakeholders, building awareness across organizations on what AI is and what it is not is extremely important. Secondly, I am a huge believer for developer experiences and data scientist experiences. And so therefore, I think we fail if we do not do the job of building the right tool sets and the right architectural frameworks and the right open source capabilities to allow our engineers and our data scientists to innovate at speed. Because you will struggle even more if you, let's say, do not have a library of ML models in the company that you can potentially have some reuse from, for example, as one example, right? Or that you do not have standards defined in terms of what is required for you from a documentation point of view, what are the different tooling available through the ML ops for you as an engineer to be able to deliver. And so I think that a lot of this responsibility for speed and timeline and expectation management, for all of us who are leaders here in the room, it is our responsibility that we not only, of course, work with our stakeholders to educate them, build awareness, but also help our teams as I'm sure you will thank me later, and we can have a conversation with your leader, right, to build and make sure that you have the right tools to do your job in a way that allows you to deliver at speed.
Yeah, AI marketplace is actually a reality, as she touched upon. The second important point that Ruchika touched upon, and in fact all of us have emphasized, is AI literacy. Once people realize that the value that can be derived by the usage of what you're doing and which is causing the delay, they'll actually be willing to perhaps wait for that period of time. And hence, the leaders have a big role to play in adoption of AI in the systems that we put into production.
And I think I will totally agree. I think it's an evolving field, right? The principles are evolving. I mean, fairly constant, but the interpretation of those principles are evolving. The tools and techniques are, evolving, right? It's more of a matter of education, the impact of not being responsible, right? When you're not able to explain, or you're not able to manage transparency, or you're not able to manage fairness, right? Data bias, right? What's the impact, right? If you have a client, right, having time to kind of sit down and go through their entire education process, I think it's going to be important. And as we kind of grow in this field, right, it's going to become more apparent. Because I think, if you start looking at GDPR when it got introduced, right, or, other compliances, it took time for people to kind of understand, what is the impact and why do I need to do this, and all the growing pains around it, right, is exactly the same for responsible AI.
Yeah.
On the practical side, having dealt with clients and worked with clients for 3.5 decades, you're never going to solve that issue. Yeah, but what really helps...
We were trying to give him hope.
But what really helps, and truly, this is a maturing field. However, we already have frameworks which are accepted by governments and large organizations which are published. Bringing that to the client will give you some legitimacy when you say, I can build a POC in 2 days, and then POCs will litter your floor, or I will build something which is sustainable, which is going to be there forever, right? But these published guidelines and frameworks, and they will evolve, will help you deal with the client anxiety of timeliness.
Also, some industries like health, like banking, those have very strong regulations where this is the need of the hour. So any AI deployment will be needed. But when it comes to defense, perhaps they don't want to let it out, and they should not. So in those, obviously, you cannot go to a customer and say, I still need to implement it, right? So it's, like no one size fits all, if I may say.
Okay, I think the panelists have been very kind to you. They just asked you, what do you do? I was thinking you're going to ask him, where do you do what you do? Okay, so with that, I'm sorry, I'm going to be a little compliant because the time says up, so I need them to be here for a small token of appreciation for each one of you. I'm going to call upon Gurvinder Singh, the Global VP for Data Science, task us to do the honors, please. Thank you. Let's put our hands together. So whilst we are at it, I just wanted to mention it to each one of you that a tree has been planted and we couldn't keep technology away. So there is a QR code on your certificate. And if you scan it, you get to see the tree with your name tag. Thank you so much. Thanks a ton.